Okay, up and running. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your busy Passover schedule as you prepare for Pesach. It's nice that you can take a little time to study. And although on this coming Shabbat we'll be reading special readings related to Pesach, I did want to make sure that we still studied a little bit from Parashat Shemini, from this week's Torah portion, so that we don't miss out on this week's part of that cycle. So we're going to be in Parashat Shemini, but don't worry, I am also still going to try and connect it to Pesach, so it covers a little bit of both sides. So we're going to start with the story without too much preamble, because I want to sort of just get right into that. And actually, I think they're doing some work outside. If someone would be willing to close the door, it'll help. I'll make sure that we still keep ventilation in the room. All right, so we're going to pick up on page 632, and this is Leviticus 9, and we're going to start with verse 22. So we're right at the end of chapter 9. So we're on page 632. As you know, we don't always start from the beginning of Shemini or any of the Torah studies that we do, because it depends on where we're going to focus. But we're going to focus on one of the more famous parts of this. So a little bit of a preamble as you're finding the right page, 632, chapter 9, verse 22. Parashat Shemini, among many other things, details the dedication, the inauguration of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and the inauguration of Aharon, Aaron, as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, as well as his sons, who will be administering the sacrifices from now on. And so there is a grand ceremony that is taking place, and we're going to pick up at the end of Aaron's section of that ceremony, and that's where verse 22 is. Everyone with me? Okay. Verse 22 from chapter 9. We're on page 632, if you're looking at the page numbers.
Yeah.
Got it. And since my designated reader has gone back up north for Pesach, I'm going to need a volunteer. Thank you.
Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he stepped down after offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
I point out a couple things here that are of interesting to note. One, the term shout semantically is awkward in English because shout in English will often have a negative connotation, whereas here this is an exulting noise. It's just same root word that we use in Kabbalat Shabbat when we say lechu neranena, come and sing loudly, or make a joyful loud noise. Not a ah, but a ha ha kind of shout. That's my best impersonation that I can do. So just to make sure that we can see that, and again, falling on the face is not a problem. This isn't them hitting the deck. This is them worshiping what is happening and worshiping God for bringing this about. So, and one more little thing. The raising of the hands, of course, is what we continue to do for the Birkat HaKohanim, for the blessing of the Kohanim. During our high holiday services, when the Kohanim come up during Musaf and they lift their hands under their talit, that still takes place to this day. The part that stands out as being rather exceptional and surprising, of course, is who lit the fire? God.
Yeah,
right? It's like, wham, fire comes out, and this is not Aaron there with, a little match or tinder, but this is a miraculous manifestation of God's presence that ignites what is on the altar for this first time. The only other duplication we get of this, apart from events that are about to come, is during the story of Elijah, when he is up on Mount Carmel and he is battling the priests of Baal. So it's a rather exceptional moment and makes a lot of sense for that first day. And the chapter ends there, and if you stopped reading there, you would think, what a great first day. And then we go on to chapter 10.
Now, Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before the Lord alien fire, which he had enjoined enjoined upon them.
All right, so this Eish Zara, this foreign fire, this alien, unknown, and uncommanded fire, they are bringing before God.
And
good thing or bad thing?
For them, it was a bad thing.
Well, we know the results, yeah. But
they were zealous in their service.
all right. So one explanation, right, is that this is zeal, right? They are caught up in the moment, and they just watched their dad do this service and watched how God accepted what he did, and they want to be like dad. They're not little kids. I'm just trying to say that they have a particular reason to want to participate in this way. And even though God didn't tell them to bring this additional incense offering, what harm could it do, right? It's just all the more to God, right? Everyone is shouting and cheering and worshiping. Yes, more is better. So it might be that they're acting purely out of zeal. But what else could be their motivation?
Jealousy.
All right. They could be jealous, right?
Yeah.
Of their father.
Their father and the uncle.
And their uncle. They got a rather famous uncle, remember,
Yeah.
Moses. So it could be that they're jealous, and it's sort of a, well, I can do that,
Yeah.
right? So why is everybody cheering my father? They should cheer us too. Come on, let's go, Nadab, right? And we'll show them how to do it. And that leads to another option, which is not mutually exclusive, which is arrogance.
Yeah.
Right? They may be thinking, ha, watch this, and thinking that what they're going to do is going to be even better than what their father did. So zeal, jealousy, arrogance, there's lots of different explanations that are brought up by the commentators. But we need to see what the result is and then try to understand it to decide whether or not it was a positive motivation or a negative motivation or maybe something else. So let's see the result.
And fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent.
Okay, that makes it all clear, right?
No.
So we just had a fire come out and take the sacrifice off the altar. And now we've got another fire coming out, and two young men are gone. And Moses gives this cryptic speech to which there is no reply from Aaron. Makes it hard to understand. So what are some of the possible explanations of this is what I meant from that verse 3?
Those who are obedient.
Okay.
Obedience,
Right.
You're near through obedience, of following the mitzvah and not being extemporaneous and overly creative.
So one way that God might be showing himself to be holy is through the duty, that is to say, the precise execution of God's commandments. And that is what is demonstrating God's holiness, God's specialness to the masses. And if the regular rank and file make mistakes and improvise, not necessarily a good thing, but it doesn't have the same catastrophic cascade of consequences, that was a lot of C sounds, that it does if those that are near to God do something that is out of the book. Because when it's in the book, then people understand that this is what God has commanded. And therefore people understand we do what God has commanded. Make sense? Also, when it's in the book, we understand that this is precisely what God wanted. Therefore, there are spiritual reasons for it, for which we can then meditate, divine, and discuss. When it's not in the book, is there necessarily a spiritual benefit that's going to come from this? Or are you telling me that I don't need to use the book to get close to God? Because you guys who have the most responsibility of being near to God, you seem to think that these other ways are fine. So there is a real challenge of what Moses is putting here. And it seems to be a reproof that he is basically telling Aaron they got what they deserved. Which is harsh, right? If you lost two sons, do you want to hear they deserved it? Would any parent want to hear that?
No.
Especially
No.
from
But-
your brother, talking about his nephews. But you can't mess around when you're at that level of closeness to God. And that's something that's going to come back later on in the story in Bamidbar with Aaron and Miriam chatting about Moses' wife, where they also don't quite seem to understand the responsibility that Moses is shouldering, or even the responsibility that this higher echelon of those that are close to God have. And Moses is saying, sorry, but yeah.
Well, it's very much like, you expect better for someone who is speaking, for your country.
Mhm.
You hold them, rightly or wrongly, to a higher standard.
Right.
Generally. Okay. But, so it's dangerous when people think they can freelance the word of God. I mean,
But it's not just the freelance. It's that
there is a word.
that there are limits, and
Yeah,
that those in a particular position of authority and publicness are at more jeopardy if they dare to break that. I remember meeting people who say, when they find out I'm a rabbi, they say, "Oh, I was raised Jewish, but I never went back to synagogue after my bar mitzvah because the rabbi embarrassed me on the bima." Right? That was it. He said blah, 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 blah to me, and I went red in the face and, was standing there, and I had to continue doing the service, but I was so mad and so humiliated in front of all of my family and all my friends. I promised I would never go back to the synagogue again. I've never been doing anything Jewish since. It's like, but if some random person had said that to you in the street, would you have done the same thing? No, of course not, right? If somebody at school had said that, if a teacher had said that, would you say, I'm never learning any more math because the teacher made me embarrassed in front of the class? You might still feel embarrassed. You might not like the subject, but you'd probably still be able to do 2 + 2 = 4, and you wouldn't say, I'm never going to use a calculator. But at certain points, when people especially are speaking in a position that others will associate with God, there is a much higher bar for what is appropriate behavior. And right now, on the very first day of the Mishkan, which we've talked about a number of times now, as being a potential trap for people to over project their own desires into of how they think worship should go, to allow this to pass would have been catastrophic, despite how tragic this result is. All right, onward, because we need to see the repercussions.
Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics, as Moses had ordered.
Now, wait a minute. Why aren't Aaron and his other children taking care of this?
Because they're Kohens.
Right, they're Kohanim. They cannot become ritually impure. Well, Aaron in particular cannot become ritually impure because he is a Kohen Gadol. His brothers potentially could, but it seems that Moses is laying down a stricter interpretation because of the duties that are taking place at this very moment. And so other non-Kohanim are taking care of the bodies.
And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, do not bare your heads and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strikes the whole community. But your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Lord has wrought. And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the Lord's anointing oil is upon you. And they did as Moses had bidden.
All right. So Moses seems to be very concerned for them, that if they further break ranks, if you will, during this moment, that they will be subject to the same type of punishment that just happened to Nadav and Abihu. And therefore, they need to stay in the precinct of the Mishkan and continue with their duties and allow everyone else to mourn. Notice that Moses isn't saying, we're not going to mourn for these two boys. It's not, they deserved it, so I'm not going to cry. It's, they deserved it, you can't cry because you have a job to do, which was precisely the problem that they had a trouble with. But the rest of us can still be sad and can still mourn the loss of these two men. So we don't believe in Judaism that you shouldn't mourn for someone who has died, even if it was deserved. But there are guidelines for how that takes place. Make sense? All right. And then a very interesting addition.
And and the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant, you or your sons, when you enter the tent of meeting, that you may not die. This is a law for all time throughout the ages. For you must distinguish between the sacred and the profane, and between the impure and the pure. And you must teach the Israelites all the laws which the Lord has imparted to them through Moses.
All right, so Erach, if you could pass that way. Pass that way. I kept one for myself. Interesting little paragraph there, which seems to have two halves that don't seem to bear any immediate relationship between them, right? Don't drink when you are coming in to do the service. And also, by the way, it's your job to teach and to make judgments of what is pure, what is impure throughout the time. Any possible connection between those two? Why put those two together in one paragraph?
Perhaps the two young men had been drinking.
And what happens when you drink?
Well, you're not supposed to serve the Lord.
Because
he commanded you not to.
Right, that's the first half of the paragraph. But I'm implying that the second half of the paragraph has a possible reason of why God would command them not to drink while serving.
It would impair their judgment.
Ah, right. If you're drunk, right, if you're drinking, you can't judge.
Except if you're driving a car.
Well, I mean, that is exactly the reason why we don't have people drive when they are drunk, because their judgment is impaired. That's the fundamental problem. It's not because, we don't like their breath or whatever. It's they can't tell that they're not driving well, and therefore they are going to drive badly. And so too for a Kohen. If the Kohen is being asked, is this object ritually pure or impure? And he's had a couple shots before coming into work, how is he going to be able to make that determination with any accuracy? And how will the people be able to rely on that interpretation? Or will people say, well, he said it was okay, but I smelled alcohol. So maybe he was wrong, so maybe it's not okay. Or he said it wasn't okay, but he smelled a little funny, so maybe it is okay, and it's actually ritually pure. When it undermines the authority by introducing the idea that it could be a regular occurrence that people would be impaired, then drinking, even if it's not enough to get you intoxicated, is forbidden before coming in to work in the Mishkan, and then later the Temple of Jerusalem.
It's not even just that they may have impaired judgment, but if there's an appearance that they may have impaired judgment, the confidence in their ability to be Kohanim is undermined.
Absolutely. Just take, for example, you come into a courtroom and the judge is sitting up on the bench, and next to him on the bench is a half-empty bottle of scotch and a shot glass. You don't see him drink.
Right.
You don't see him sway. You don't see him slur his speech, but it's just sitting there on the bench. Wouldn't you be a little suspicious of his judgments? Yeah, it's the appearance is undermining everything that God is trying to achieve, and that is a big problem. In fact, it's such a big problem that in the handout that just went around in Vayikra Rabbah in the Midrash, it's used as an explanation for why Nadav and Abihu died.
Rabbi Ishmael says they had entered the sanctuary after having drunk wine.
Right, so it wasn't necessarily zeal or jealousy or arrogance. Rabbi Ishmael says, no, they were drunk.
The proof is that after their death, Torah admonished the survivors that they may not enter the sanctuary after having drunk wine.
Right, so it's answering the question, why here, why now is this commandment about not drinking being given? It must be to rectify what they just did. Right, it's like the day after some kid gets hurt on the monkey bars is when the sign goes up that says, no one on the monkey bars under the age of 6, or only one person on the monkey bars at a time. We used to, this is a real story, in elementary school, we used to do what we called chicken fights on the monkey bar, where you would hang by your hands and you would try to kick the other kid off. And once a kid got really hurt, only one person on the monkey bars from then on. But they only put that rule in place after the kid got hurt. And that is what the logic of Rabbi Ishmael is here, is that the rule about drinking only came because we just saw what can happen when 2 drunk guys show up to be Kohanim.
This is analogous to a king who had a faithful attendant. When he found him standing at the tavern entrance, he severed his head in silence and appointed another attendant in his place.
Now, notice in the analogy, Rabbi Ishmael is rather pointedly showing that in our parallel, that is to say, the death of Nadav and Abihu, we don't get a great explanation. Right? That's, remember, while we were struggling, trying to figure it out on our own. And Rabbi Ishmael is saying, yeah, when God killed these 2, he did not give a speech. It's just, boom, dead. Oh, and by the way, and that's why he's saying there's an analogy.
We would not know why he put the first to death, but for his enjoining the second, thus, you must not enter the doorway of taverns, from which we know that for such a reason he had put the first one to death. We know from this that they died precisely on account of the wine. For this reason, Scripture showed love to Aaron by directing the divine utterance to him alone. Thus, do not drink wine that will lead to intoxication.
You may remember that when we hit that verse 8, it rather unusually says, God said to Aaron.
Aaron.
Yeah.
Normally it'll say God spoke to Moses, or God spoke to Moses and Aaron. This is one of the very few places where you'll get God spoke to Aaron. And that's why the Rabbi Ishmael is saying this is how we should understand in the death, is that this paragraph is precisely linked to the death of the sons. All right, so quick question then. How many cups of wine do we drink on Passover? 4 cups of wine. Is that a problem? Right? Are we able to conduct the Seder drinking 4 cups of wine? Right? If my cups of wine were like your water bottle,
Yeah.
how am I going to be after the first couple? Right? So there is a problem. You know, in Judaism, we have wine as a marker for so many of our celebrations, for every Friday night, for every holiday. And yet we also have this admonition about the Kohanim that we know that there can be problems with drinking wine or other intoxicants. Does this then apply to the rest of us? Or is it only the Kohanim and only when they're doing their work that we have to be worried about drunkenness? And for the rest of us, or the rest of the time, even for them, it's not such an issue. Basically, what is Judaism's view about knocking a few back?
Wine gladdens the heart.
We're going to see that as a specific quote. So we're going to look through some different quotes taken from Jewish tradition as well as the Tanakh, and try to see if we can navigate what does Judaism believe about drinking.
But you say a strong drink for the perishing.
So let's go ahead.
And then you have the problem of quorum.
We're going to get there.
How about the people who they were with this sickness? They
means-
were alcoholic,
Yes.
and then are they allowed to do it?
Ah.
They have to do it or not?
So for people that are right, that are recovering from alcoholism, everybody agrees they should use grape juice and not actually wine. So it's still fulfilling the mitzvah because it is fruit from the vine. It is still wine, but it is 0% alcoholic, and therefore alcoholics should use that. But the question is, for people who aren't afflicted with alcoholism, but could still get, drunk, where do we draw the line in Judaism? How far do we let it go?
After 2 cups, you drink grape juice.
So we're going to work out some solutions by the end, but I want to work through our tradition's views on this. So let's go ahead and see from the book of Samuel.
Now Hannah was praying in her heart. Her lips were moving, but her voice was silent. So Eli thought she was drunk.
Right, we can imagine this, right? Hannah is down. She's at the Mishkan after it's been and moved in Israel, of course, and she is praying, but it says, and she looks like she is just a muttering drunk, like somebody in the gutter who just talking to themselves in a stupor.
How long will you act like a drunk? Sober up, Eli told her. No, sir, Hannah replied. I'm just a very sad woman. I haven't had any wine or beer, but have been pouring out my heart to the Lord.
All right, so obviously Eli judged the book by a cover, and that was a problem. But he also teaches us something, that if she had been drunk, it would have been inappropriate for her to be praying. And indeed, this is part of Jewish law. When it comes time for the Amidah, you are not allowed to do the Amidah drunk. You cannot walk into the king's throne room and begin to have a conversation with God while you are drunk. That's simply inappropriate. So apparently there were rules for the Kohanim about not being drunk, and those rules, at least we can see here, when it comes to praying, also apply to the rest of us. Make sense? Okay.
And obviously, he has seen people
Drunk like
drunk
that.
like that.
Yes.
His first impression is she's drunk.
I know what this is. I've seen it before.
I've seen it before.
And we're actually going to see from a number of sources, drunkenness is not a new problem.
Yeah.
This has been around for a while. In fact, as my segue to the next section of Talmud, it may have been there from the beginning.
As to the tree from which the first person ate.
Remember, despite the lovely artistic representations in so many paintings and other things, there is no indication at all that the fruit from the tree in the Garden of Eden was an apple. Right? Never says apple. And actually, historically, apples were not cultivated in that part of the world or even domesticated to the way that we would recognize them as a modern apple at that time. So it could not have been an apple if you wanted to go off strict biology and history and anthropology and geography. But there are better options, say our sages.
Rabbi Meyer says it was a vine.
Right. Vines, by the way, in terms of fruit vine, grapevines are considered to be like trees because they produce fruit year after year after year.
For there is
I'm sorry.
For there is nothing that causes for man so much wailing as wine, as it says in Genesis 9.
This is for Noah.
From Noah. And he drank of the wine and got drunk.
And we know there were lots of problems right after that. So Rabbi Meir is saying we can work backwards. If you want to know what Adam and Eve ate that caused all the trouble and their expulsion, it was probably wine, right? They were probably drinking the fruit of the tree rather than eating in the traditional sense. That was because classically, no one sat around eating grapes. Grapes were not like our modern table grapes where you could just sit down and eat them and they were lovely. They were usually sour. And not the kind of thing you would want to eat, but fermented, that was their, in quote, perfect form. And the ancients knew that. And so Rabbi Meir is saying by looking at the result, we can work our way backwards and say, what could have caused that much trouble? Wine.
Rabbi Nehemiah says it was a fig tree, for the source of the curse proved also to be the remedy. As it is said, And they sewed fig leaves together.
Right? So he says, no, no, rather than working backwards, work forwards, right? What is the result? The result is they end up putting on fig leaves right after they've eaten from the fruit. Therefore, the after effect tells you what the eating was, right? What the food was. And then the actual function is what Rabbi Yehuda is going to go for.
Rabbi Yehuda says, it was wheat, for a child does not know how to call his mother and father by name before he can taste wheat.
Because what was this the fruit of? The tree of knowledge, right? Of good and evil. So he's saying if this is knowledge, then it's got to be something that is a marker of knowledge. And wheat is the marker of maturity, that you are old enough to be able to eat this solid food. That's when you're old enough to be expected to know things like Abba and Ima. And so he's working from the adjective that's being used to what food is most associated. But again, for our focus on our 4 cups of wine, Rabbi Meir is trying to point out to us that wine is dangerous. Right? You could see wine as being the source of the loss of innocence, so to speak. All right, from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes.
So I commend the enjoyment of life, because nothing is better for man under the sun than to eat and drink and be glad. Then joy will accompany him in his work all the days of his life that God has given him under the sun.
Okay, so apparently drinking's good, right? I mean, that's what Kohelet, which is King Solomon, is saying. And trust me, drinking back then did not mean crystal well water. Drinking back then was almost always of a fermented beverage. It was simply safer. Water was almost always polluted, and at the very least with random bacteria. And if it was from your town, almost certainly from human and animal waste. So you wanted to ferment and boil that stuff. And so that was the common drink that people had, was something fermented. So this appears to be saying that eat, drink, be glad, in that order perhaps, is a good model for life. In fact,
go, eat your bread with joy, and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works.
Right? So apparently, drinking and eating, right? This is a sign of satiation, a sign of contentment, a sign of what it means to have done what you need to do. So wine's okay here. It's a symbol of joy, not a robber of joy. And then, of course, from Psalms, very famously,
wine gladdens the human heart,
which we, I think, can all see on an average human. At least a certain measure of alcohol does tend to make a person seem happier. So is this pro wine? Is this brought to you by the liquor industry? It's should we put Psalm 104 on the wine bottle rather than warning this may cause birth defects?
Yeah, right.
Well, we also have the book of Mishle, the book of Proverbs.
Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly.
You gotta love that, the phrasing here. This is somebody who's drunk wine, right? This is not written by someone who was a teetotaler from when they were a kid. This is somebody who has looked at it and said, boy, that looks good.
In the end, it bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Your eyes will see strange sights, and your mind will imagine confusing things. You will be like one sleeping on the high seas, lying on top of the rigging.
We got that feeling there, right?
They hit me, you will say, but I'm not hurt. They beat me, but I don't feel it. When will I wake up so I can find another drink?
I mean, could it be more modern? That we have seen, not only with alcohol, but with other substances, not just other liquors, but, with opium, with cocaine, with all the things that people are addicted to, where their whole life becomes wrapped up in this process. And They just feel like they're on top of the world when they have it, and they only can think about getting more when they don't. And that's what Michelet is trying to say here, is that it may start off making you feel good, but if you linger over it, if you let your longing go towards it, then you're headed in the wrong direction. So we begin to see with Michelet the distinction that having a little, having the right amount with dinner, for a celebration, for a mitzvah, perfectly fine. But making it the focus, making it something of your obsession, making it something of your desire rather than something that complements the main thing, that's where it is going to begin to grab a hold and take you with it.
I have a cousin back in my country.
Mhm.
He was a nice person, married with kids and everything very responsible. But when he touched one,
Mhm.
he couldn't stop.
Ah.
And then I told him, you were my first cousin. And I told him, why don't you put your pants on and take that's it and don't try.
Right.
And then he said, I can't. I have something inside of me that is coming and asks me for this.
Right.
And I cannot stop. What can we do with people like that?
I mean, that's addiction, and we can work to try and support them as best we can. You know, that's why we try to put together programs like Alcoholics Anonymous and other rehabilitation methods in order to try and keep them, because somebody like that who really, once they taste, they can't stop, we have to be there to support them, to keep them from tasting. And it's somebody like that absolutely, even for Kiddush or for Pesach, they should not be drinking alcohol at all. Grape juice is perfectly fine. And they shouldn't say, oh, well, it's a mitzvah, so I have. No. You can do the mitzvah without touching actual alcohol, and can do it only with the liquid from those grapes. But you're right, it's that addiction, that physical need that pulls them, that is so hard to fight. Some people, it's not so physical, it's more they want to, and they desire it for other reasons. But for so many people, it is a physical need, just like the physical drive for opioids, or for cocaine, or for any other addictive type substances, cigarettes, for example, that a person physically is being pulled towards it, and it makes it very hard to stop.
I like the, you know you're in trouble when it says, they hit me and I'm not even hurt.
Yeah.
They beat me.
Yeah. How many drunk people think they're invincible, right? I mean, it goes back to the lack of judgment. Right? Yeah, I can take him. It's like, the guy's 2 feet taller than you and 2 feet wider than you. What are you doing? It's just that lack of judgment, right? You can no longer tell where you are. Okay, onward again for Proverbs.
It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, and deprive all the oppressed of their rights. Let beer be for those who are perishing, wine for those who are in anguish. Let them drink and forget their poverty, and remember their misery no more. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy.
All right, so the middle part first, because it's the part that I think can be easily misunderstood. When it says, let them drink and forget their poverty, remember their misery no more, this is not talking about getting so drunk that you don't know what's happening. It means that the gladness that can come from a glass of wine or from a drink can make an otherwise miserable moment feel a bit better. This is why we command, for example, at the Seder, everyone drinks 4 cups of wine, even the poor, and the wealthy in the community have to provide that. They have to make sure that at the Seder, that even the poorest person in the Jewish community can lift their glass 4 times and feel free, feel like they're not a slave for at least those 4 moments during the Seder. It doesn't mean that they are supposed to get plastered and be unconscious and forget their poverty. It means for those moments, they can rise for that occasion. So that part I want to make sure we get clear. We're not talking about induced intoxication as a solution to life's problems. But look at the other half of this, which is for the people who have the ability to drink whenever they feel like it, and who have positions of authority and responsibility. We see parallels to our earlier discussion of Nadav and Avihu, right? And the rule given to the Kohanim. Right? It's not only for the Kohanim that need to be careful when making rules. If you are a leader, if you are in any position where you need to make judgment, especially on the needs of others, then you need to not be drinking. Again, if you had a surgeon come in, you would not want to see him put the flask in his pocket before he begins surgery. It just wouldn't make you feel good, even if he wasn't doing it, even if it was water in there, but you don't know, you would not trust his judgment. If there was somebody, if there were legislators going to vote on bills, you would not want to see them leaving from the tavern and going across the street and going to vote, which, by the way, was very, very common in England, where people would go to the taverns while things were being done, and also was common all the way through the United States. I don't know if it still is, but it used to be that people would bring liquor to the floor of the House and the Senate, and they would sit and drink during the debates. So I don't think C-SPAN shows that nowadays. But
there's also a wise lesson here of the use of intoxicants for those who are perishing or who are in anguish.
Mm-hmm.
There's an appropriate use.
Correct. And if we're talking about anesthetic, when we're really at the end of life,
and
yes.
Even for alcohol, I remember my grandfather, his doctor said, yeah, make sure he gets a good bourbon every night. He'll feel better and eat his dinner.
Right. And that also comes back to our modern trouble with opioids, which is, for the average person, opium is a terrible scourge, but for somebody who is suffering from excruciating pain, it is the touch of heaven. It is there to help them be able to function. And finding a way to reserve it and administer it only in ways that are needed for people that are in true pain and illness, that's the challenge that we have. Onward, also from Proverbs.
Do not join those who drink too much wine or gorge themselves, for drunkards and gluttons become poor, and drowsiness clothes them in rags.
Right, so this is not even a question of how good of a judge you are, or whether you're giving it for the right person or the wrong person. This is a question of, if you drink too much and you're running after the parties all the time, your end is pretty much guaranteed. You are going to go from somebody who can do all of that because they have the resources and time, to someone who can't do all of that because you will have impoverished yourself. Now you'll notice all of these quotes from Proverbs. Traditionally, who was the author of Mishle, of Proverbs?
Solomon.
King Solomon. Somebody who spent a lot of time among the kings of other countries and among the wealthy and elite. And he would have been in the best position to see the effects of this. And I think his advice should be well taken.
The alcoholism is sometimes called a disease of prosperity.
Mm.
You have to be in a prosperous area in order to pursue your love of pleasure, your love of wine.
To a certain degree. I mean, alcoholism nowadays, because of cheap manufacturing, is much more accessible across the economic spectrum. But yes, historically, you had to rise to a certain level to have the luxury of drinking so much that you could be drunk all the time.
Woe to those who rise early in the morning to run after their drinks, who stay up late at night till they are inflamed with wine. They have harps and lyres at their banquets, tambourines and flutes and wine, but they have no regard for the deeds of the Lord, no respect for the work of his hands.
The party culture, right? For those who live for the party, the lute and the lyre, the tambourine, these are all considered to be like the bands. They've got their dance parties going on. They're at the disco or wherever the kids hang out these days, and they're drinking and doing shots, and that's how they spend their time. When I lived in Japan, there were many of the other teachers there who would drink their paychecks. When they got paid, they would go to the big party districts of Tokyo, and they would just drink $300 worth of drink in one night, and then call in sick the next day because they were sick. They had such a bad hangover. And then they would run out of money before the end of the month, and then they would have to be eating just rice, and then they get paid and right back again. They would go right back again. And many of them, when they left after working for a year or two, they had nothing in savings because they had literally drunk all of their savings month after month after month. And you can see Isaiah saying, this is not a life. And it's not only a life because of what it does to you, but it's also not a life because you fail to appreciate the world around you. If you think that's the only thing that's fun, that's the only thing that makes you feel good, then you are showing ultimate disrespect to God. Because God has given us so much else that enriches our lives without destroying it. How do you turn your back on that? All right, back to the Talmud.
Rava says, one is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim until one does not know the difference between cursed is Haman and blessed is Mordecai. Rabbah and Rabbi Zerah had the Purim feast together. They became intoxicated. Rabbah rose and slew Rabbi Zerah. The next day, Rabbah prayed for mercy and revived him. The next year, Rabbah asked him, Rabbi Zerah, let Master come and we will have the Purim feast together. Rabbi Zerah answered him, not every time does a miracle occur.
Right, it's like, come back and join me again. It's like, what are you, nuts? Right, so, but that is often the attitude. If someone drives drunk and they get home safely, they think, oh, it's not that bad. Or if they drive drunk and they have an accident, but no one's seriously hurt, they think, oh, it's not that bad, right? And what we're getting from this message is, no, it is that bad because you got lucky. There was a miracle that time, and you don't count on miracles time after time after time. You don't engage in risky behavior hoping that there will be a miracle that will save you from your risky behavior. So how do we take then the admonition of the Talmud to really drink more than is usual on Purim? Well, the Ramah, Rabbi Yisraelis, has this to say from Shulchan Aruch.
And there are those who say that one need not get too inebriated, rather drink a little more than usual and sleep. For during sleep, one is unable to make the distinction. And whether one drinks heavily or drinks a small amount, intention toward heaven is required.
So that last sentence in particular is so important. I've seen so many people, especially on Purim, but on other holidays as well, just put back so many drinks. And they're not doing it for the sake of heaven, right? They're not drinking it because they are just celebrating God's miraculous deliverance of our people, or if it's Simchat Torah, celebrating the wonderful gift of Torah. They're doing it because they have an excuse to drink in public. And that is no longer doing the mitzvah by anybody's definition. And I should also point out, the Purim feast, the time when you're supposed to drink on Purim, if you're following the first half of that Talmud story, is the afternoon of Purim, not the evening Megillah reading, right? So you read the beginning of Purim, the evening, you read the Megillah, you wake up the next morning, you go to Minyan, you read the Megillah again along with the Torah readings, and then in the afternoon, you sit down with your family and your friends and you have a feast, and that is where you drink more than usual. And for the usual, you might drink nothing, and then for Purim, you might drink a glass of wine or something like that, and then have a little nap, and you're good. That's what the Ramah is saying. And Kolbo is going to point out why this is so important, not just for Purim, but also in general.
One should not get drunk, for inebriation is completely forbidden. There is no greater sin than this, for it causes forbidden sexual relationships, murder, and many other sins. However, one should drink a little more than usual in order to increase happiness, and also to create happiness and comfort for the poor. This is full happiness.
Right? If you are celebrating with your family, if you're celebrating with the poor, making sure they can also celebrate, and you're letting yourself be a little bit more relaxed and glad than usual because it's a holiday and you don't have to work and toil and all of that, and you're celebrating the miracles that have been done for us and the joy that God has allowed us, you know what? That's fine. But if you think the goal is to get drunk, you've completely missed the point. And in fact, he's arguing that getting drunk at all for any occasion, whether it be a holiday or whether it be just a Thursday, getting drunk is forbidden. Because once you're drunk, you can't judge. Drink a little, sure. But as soon as you actually cross that line of drunkenness, then you have transgressed because you have voluntarily laid down your judgment and you don't know what you'll do, because that's what drunkenness is.
This ties it back to native and being a little is good,
Mhm.
but more is not always better.
Not so much. Not so much. Now, coming back to Pesach in our final few minutes. What does this mean for our 4 cups of wine, which I guarantee you 4 dinner glasses full of wine is going to wipe most people out? It means that we have to be measured. The rabbis of the old, they used to literally measure their wines. They pour wine in and they would mix it with water to match the strength that was appropriate for the individual person or for the occasion. And they made sure that the wine they drank on Pesach was not making them drunk. Because for them, as for us, the key obligation is to be able to retell the story of the Exodus and to celebrate in gladness, not to end up under the table covered in matzah crumbs. That's not what Pesach is supposed to be. So if you have your first cup and it's full strength and you're feeling a little too good by the time you get to the second cup, cut it with water. And if you're feeling, that you need to cut it a little bit more for the third, that's fine. And for the fourth, it is better to drink a full cup that is not full of wine than it is to get hammered and not be able to do the mitzvah, or to do it in an embarrassingly rude fashion, or to say, I'm not going to drink at all. No, allow yourself to be part of the wonderful tradition of the Seder, but find the way to balance your measure so that it is actually a celebration rather than a problem. Make sense? Okay.
Thank you.
Take care, and Chag Sameach to everyone if I don't happen to see you before Friday.